Hello and welcome to The Current Thing with me, Nick Dixon. And today we have another excellent guest. He is my GB News colleague, right wing comedian, and immigrant. It's Nicholas Santo. Sorry, Nicholas, I don't know why I had to say that. I thought it'd be funny.
Yeah, it's kind of all right. Did you say right wing what? I missed that.
Right wing comedian, that's how you're billed, isn't it?
Yeah. So no, I think everything checks out.
Everything was accurate.
Yeah.
So we got so much to talk about. So I thought maybe we could start with your BBC job and the fact that people might not realize you were sort of cancelled from your job at the BBC because of your dangerous comedy. Is that right?
In a way, yeah. I was given. Let's put it this way. I was given a choice between continuing to do my comedy or continue my job at the BBC. So there were repeated occasions in which they told me, do not do this. So first I get a couple of warnings, and at some point I got a final written warning in a big disciplinary case in which, believe it or not, I was accused of being simultaneously, and this is kind of topical, pro-Israeli and also pro-Nazi in my comedy, and
That makes
and
sense. I thought you were going to say
and
pro-Israeli
homophobic
and
and
pro-Palestine
transphobic. No. Pro-Israel. Well, yeah, it
because
was
I've been
funny.
attacked for that. I've been attacked for being too pro-Israel and then for supporting Andrew Tate, who supports Palestine. So I've managed to get a one-star review for both of those. We mainly have five-star reviews, but I managed to get two one-star reviews for being on either side. But you were pro-Nazi, pro-Israel, and a transphobe.
Yeah, I mean, it was even actually longer than that. I was also it was basically two disciplinary cases at the same time with different panels, and I had to prepare myself for different defenses and everything. It was a long list of things, including the comedy. And one other bit was I had the audacity to tell fellow BBC colleagues internally that another BBC colleague's report was not impartial. And they said, you cannot question the impartiality of your colleague's work, because by doing that, you will jeopardize our impartiality. so, so it was all that. And, it's ironically, it's a BBC, and I do joke about it in one of my routines. It's a BBC mantra, or go-to place. They say, well, Tories are not happy with us and Labour is not happy with us, so we must be doing something, right? So maybe I should have had, in my defense, told them, if you think I'm both pro-Nazi and pro-Israeli in the same, comedy career, maybe I'm doing something right. But yeah, so eventually I got this final written warning, and I thought, okay, I better get out.
I love that defense that we must be doing something right. Maybe you're just rubbish if everyone hates you. You know what I mean? I was reading a Telegraph, not Telegraph, a Times hit piece today on Calvin Robinson. It was an awful. Today, as we record, they've just released a ludicrous hit piece against him. But one thing they said is like he uses the fact that his opinions are sort of not liked as proof that they must be right. And there is something in that if you're outside the mainstream. But now what they're using against you at the BBC, they're claiming that means their opinions are right, much like the Times is attacking Calvin for. It just popped into my head. But yeah, it could mean that your opinions are too edgy and correct. Or in the BBC's case, it could mean they're impartial, or it could just mean they're doing a bad job. I mean, lately they've really fallen apart on impartiality. But what was your job title at the BBC? What were you actually doing?
I started as a broadcast journalist with one department of BBC World Service, which is called BBC Persian TV, because they broadcast in different languages. And so that was one of the exotic outlets of the BBC. They used to broadcast in about 30 languages now. Some of them have been shut down because of the cuts and everything. So I started with them, and then a few years later, I was promoted to senior broadcast journalist. I would do output editing. Some of these, jobs or titles you are familiar with because you are at GB News as well. So officially senior broadcast journalist or senior journalist, doing a bit of reporting, presenting, or output editor, or simply producing. So a bunch of stuff.
And the catalyst was, I believe, a piece in the Spectator highlighting you as a kind of a right wing comedian or a countercultural comedian or a comedian to watch or something.
Yeah, well, ironically, that was that. Not that I'm unhappy about, because to this day, maybe that's one of the biggest accolades, if you like, or best reviews I've received. But as I said, there were my bosses received different complaints. You know, sometimes concerned members of the audience, which might as well have been some of my colleagues who didn't like me, because believe it or not, the majority of the newsroom was not pro-Brexit, pro-Trump, anti-abortion. I don't know if you can fathom that, but uh, so we have these so-called concerned members of the audience who had discovered that I was doing comedy, but the catalyst, or the acceleration of my troubles coincided with that article in the Spectator, where I was honored to be listed along three other comics as one of the best on woke comedians to watch. That was, I think, 2020. Yeah, it was one of my Unleashed gigs, and of course there was my name and a link, and it was nice,
Yeah.
but ironically, it also caused me a lot of trouble.
I remember the piece, but I didn't. I sort of missed the trouble it caused you. I think because that was a bit after my time in comedy. I was sort of semi-retired by then. I mean, I started, I think, a long time before you in comedy. When did you start comedy?
2017.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I started 2011. So a kind of a different comedic generation. So I kind of missed all that. So you basically you were in the Spectator. What comedians got hold of it and emailed the BBC?
Well, I don't know who got hold of it. I don't know if my boss was one of the readers of that article just spontaneously, or someone just sent them a screen grab or the link. That was the first time I got into trouble, and I kind of had to promise I would never do that again. And then the lockdown happened, so nobody was doing much comedy anyway. Uh, but then somebody got hold of my YouTube channel, and I was doing this routine, one of those routine behind the camera, I mean, at home, because it was a lockdown time, obviously. And I had this joke, and the joke was deemed transphobic. So that was that. And in general, they were like, you shouldn't do comedy because it jeopardizes the good impartial name of the BBC. Although, I've said that this before, so forgive me if you've heard it, but in Italy, you have this saying, the law is applied to the enemies and interpreted for the friends. The law is applied to the enemies but interpreted for the friends. So, the Naga Munchettis and Gary Linekers and other BBC personalities can do and write and tweet whatever they want. Meanwhile, I was not a public figure in the UK because I was part of the World Service. So I was broadcasting, when I was broadcasting, in a different language to a different audience who had no idea I was, doing stand-up comedy in some uh, more or less unknown pubs around London or wherever. You know, so
Yeah.
so the risk was really minimal, if you see what I mean. But
Yeah.
the law was applied to me because I was not one of them, and it was applied to me in the harshest possible interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a further irony one could argue in the fact that someone like Nish Kumar can just be incredibly, partial in his comedy. He's basically an activist. You know, his comedy is basically "you're an idiot if you vote Brexit" and so on. It's sort of almost it becomes almost like activism at times without any jokes. And so there's a question like if they mistakenly let you on the BBC as a comedian somehow, and you came out and did a right wing routine, would that be fine? Even though it wouldn't happen because the furthest I'll ever go is Jeff Norcott. But who's and you're a bit more out there than Jeff. He's a bit more moderate in his approach. But what do you think? I mean, was it the problem that you were there as a journalist, not as a comedian? But you could, in theory, be a comedian saying something right wing on the BBC. In
Well,
theory,
if they want to apply the letter of terms and conditions, you shouldn't have any, outside activities which, as I said, jeopardizes their impartiality. So you can't come out as a right-wing comedian. And I said, look, what if it's a character act? This might as well be a character act,
and
which
they're like, "Is it? No."
no, it is not. But I thought, okay, what if I don't do political comedy? I just do, observational comedy, talking about, buying fridges or airline food, and still they were like, no, you have to basically get clearance for your routines in written form. Can you imagine? Is that possible? No, of course not. You just need to take your jokes to your boss for every gig and his boss, and of course, I could get that if this was applied to everybody, fairly and evenly, which, as I said, it's not, because I do have colleagues, former colleagues, not just famous ones like Gary Lineker. These people do podcasts, about feminism or about immigration, about, LGBT and whatever. And none of this is impartial, because nothing is impartial at the end of the day. This is the
Of
big
course.
lie that they sell us, that we can be impartial. You cannot be impartial, you know? So yeah, so you do have colleagues who do all these outside activities, and it's fine, because the majority of the management establishment and fellow colleagues in the newsroom approve of those things and those views, so nothing happens to them.
Yeah.
So when I say canceled from my day job, it is not exactly canceled in the sense that you got a gig and some pressure groups or some not jobs call or pressure the venue to kick you out, as we know. So it wasn't like that. If you want to look at it fairly, they were within their rights to say, no, you are a member of our organization or corporation, and you cannot do anything that, according to our terms and conditions, jeopardize our our good impartial name. What
Yeah.
I have a harder time digesting is, first of all, they don't apply their own terms and conditions evenly to people across the political spectrum. And secondly, another part was that they are not impartial in the first place. Hence, the other disciplinary case in which I was arguing, look, this report you are airing about Donald Trump's border wall in Arizona is not impartial because of all these reasons. And they never said, okay, these reasons are good or baseless for these reasons. What
Yeah.
they said, no, how dare you say that the BBC journalist has come up with an impartial, with a biased report that actually is offensive. And did you know that some of your colleagues might have migrant or refugee backgrounds? I might have migrant or refugee background. I'm not Anglo-Saxon. If you checked out, uh, what are we talking about? Because some colleagues were upset. Imagine my surprise. Paul Joseph Watson would say, imagine my shock. Colleagues were upset because these colleagues were fake refugees from the Middle East, and I was saying another report about potentially fake asylum seekers from Mexico was not impartial. So it was just a farcical case. I got a 6 month written warning for that one, which would have meant after 6 months it would have been cancelled from my records. But for the comedy disciplinary procedure, I got a final written warning. So basically, one more performance, and I would have been sacked. So I just thought I would leave myself.
Wow. I mean, you should have just joined Hamas if you wanted the BBC to be sympathetic to you. I mean, that would
Oh
have been fine.
yeah.
They'd have been like, he's not a terrorist. He's a great guy. And I love the idea, by the way, of you trying to do just observational comedy to try and get around it, but then it just ends up right wing anyway. Like, oh, I bought this new fridge, as you talked about. Oh, but and I put it as high as I want because climate change isn't real, but it's been badly installed by the immigrant labor. I could just imagine you like trying, but you just wouldn't be able to do it. You'd just go right wing anyway.
Maybe
Um,
I was just trying to buy myself time for GB News to get the ground, get up and
yeah,
running, to just
yeah.
to find some alternative outlets.
Playing the long game. Um, but then didn't the Free Speech Union help you? Quick shout out to Toby.
Oh yeah, they did, and I think I've said this before elsewhere. And I actually did the Free Speech Union gig at Comedy Unleashed. I was a last minute reserve, but I did it, and Toby was there. So I was a member of NUJ, which is the National Union of Journalists. But at some point, and the way it works, for those who don't know, is that every department has their own NUJ chapel that they elect. And well, ironically, these chapels were also in bed with the management, or were the part of the management, or wives or family members or best buddies of the management. But that's another story. And at some point, my rep, in other words, the person who was in my chapel at my, you know, department, said, "No, I can't defend you because I'm a feminist and I believe in the equality of men and women." Well, I believe in equality of men and women as well, but women actually have more in this country. But that's another thing. But I thought, I'm a paying member of this union, and Milosevic and Saddam Hussein got defense for their trials. Well, what can I do? So long story short, I emailed a free speech union, of which I was also a member, and they were kind enough to give me a rep from another union. By union, I mean a professional union, not free speech union. That was called Affinity, if I'm not mistaken. A very nice guy helped me through both these cases. Coming up with mitigating factors, and presenting the defenses, and they also gave me a coach, because it was a tough time. We were under lockdown, so I was on my own, and colleagues maybe were afraid. Some of them were not sympathetic to me. Obviously, as I said, they might have been behind. At least one of these, I know for sure, cases. But I wasn't suicidal or anything. But it was a tough time for anybody, and you are, um, I was a British citizen by then. But can you imagine, if you were a foreigner, you lose your job, you might have to leave the country, you lose your livelihood. It's COVID lockdown. So Free Speech Union, not only did they give me a rep to defend me, which did a fine job, but also they gave me a kind of a coach, somebody to talk to, and in terms of the psychological impact, to manage that area as well.
But what I mean, I'm not very great on legal stuff. I mean, were you suing the BBC? Were you trying to get a settlement? What was the actual? Was there a legal case or what?
No, I was not suing the BBC at all. The BBC had put me through not one but two disciplinary procedures. So basically, the BBC was like, "Okay, there have been complaints about you, one of which was from my colleague. As I said, this colleague was mad, or was angry and upset, probably together with some other colleagues, that I had dared say, our colleague, another colleague, um, it was Clive Myrie from BBC News, not from BBC Persian TV, but from BBC News. I said Clive Myrie's report on Arizona wall is not impartial, and now you're forcing us to dub this, to reversion this into Persian for our own audience. Uh, and I had to do it because they were forcing us to do that. But I thought, if it happens again, I won't do this, because this is not impartial, and this is nonsense, for all these reasons, right? And this had made colleagues upset, and they also said you had no right to send an internal. I didn't leak anything to Daily Mail or anyone. I sent an internal email to fellow colleagues saying, I don't think we are doing the right job because of these reasons. And this had made our lefty colleagues upset, and because uh, they had refugee backgrounds or whatever. So apparently that makes them, entitled to not like what I thought about that report. So that was one of the cases, and the other case was the comedy, transphobic joke, pro-Israeli and also pro-Nazi at the same time. Um, Actually, pro-Nazi thing was not the comedy, but they said, "Why have you shared pictures of the pictures pictures of the well I'll tell you what this one, pictures of some Nazi figures on your tweet." I said, did you read the tweet? Because Twitter didn't take it down, and it got so many likes, and because it was completely in line with the Israeli narrative or with the Iranian opposition narrative. But this is how dumb my bosses were. If you want, I tell you that story as well. Israel had taken out an Iranian nuclear procurer, okay, who was a general of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, the notorious Revolutionary Guards, who are listed as a terrorist organization by the United States and some other countries, Canada as well, I think, or maybe not yet. But anyway, and of course, Israelis were behind this because they don't want the Iranians to reach the nuclear bomb, although they didn't openly admit it. But everybody knew that's who they were. And the Iranian regime was glorifying this fallen figure as a nuclear scientist. But maybe he had a PhD or something. But basically, he was the guy going around to countries like Pakistan or North Korea and procuring Iran with nuclear, material and know-how. So mocking this narrative, I put up pictures of a couple of Nazi figures like Goebbels. I said, okay, he was a communication scientist or telecommunication scientist, and I don't know, it was Himmler or Goering, and I said he was a data processing scientist. You know, so I'm obviously I'm meaning they were anything but scientists, and the tweet got a lot of likes, and of course Twitter, which was not owned by Elon Musk at that time, had no problem at it. But these bosses were, or whoever was against me, had such a rush to come up with as much evidence against me as possible. They said, okay, on Twitter you have posted pictures of Nazi, echelons. And I was like, okay, but what did I write above it or underneath it? Was it? And at the same time, I was in the same case. I was also accused of being pro-Israeli in my stand-up comedy. So that was the funny part, basically.
Yeah. Well, they always like to remove context when they feel like it. I mean, Lawrence Fox got in a lot of trouble for posting that rainbow pride flag sort of reshaped into a swastika, which was clearly a satire, admittedly fairly crude one on this is the new kind of fascism that you must listen to. But he got a lot of trouble for that. But to me, it was like an obvious satire and not that controversial. But hey, maybe I'm not the gauge. But so then, if this isn't too personal, then how have you sort of survived? You lost your job and then you're doing comedy, but I mean, it's tough to survive in comedy even if you're
Mhm.
doing all the massive clubs and there's not that much work in comedy.
Yeah.
And so have you managed to do okay from you've got YouTube and now you've got GB or what?
Yeah, I mean, GB News is a recent thing, of course, which I'm very pleased with, being on headliners with old friends like yourself and Andrew and others, and that's nice. I had some YouTube success after, but this came late. Earlier this year, I did this routine that arguably, according to some publications, for example, American Mind, there's a website called American Mind. They wrote a feature in which compared this as a pro-life or anti-abortion routine to other anti-abortion jokes by the likes of Louis C.K. and Bill Burr and Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle got into trouble also for some abortion jokes, but
Was that
the
the Disney one? Was that the Disney joke?
I don't remember the Disney
Oh,
joke. I remember the one in which he says,
no,
"Look,
your joke.
my joke." Oh
Yeah,
well,
yeah, because I'm just saying I loved your Disney because you did a
oh,
brilliant
oh, oh,
routine about
thank
Disney
you.
where you said they're paying their employees to go and travel to get an
Yeah,
abortion. I'm like, you're killing your future customers. I thought it was
I
a
know. Oh,
brilliant
oh,
bit.
thanks for knowing, remembering that. But obviously, if it has made an impression on your mind coming from you means all the more. But yeah, so the thing that I'm claiming, or my claim to fame, if you like, or according to this website, American Mind, the author had come up with the conclusion that although these giant figures, that is Louis C.K., Dave Chappelle, um, and Bill Burr, do have anti-abortion jokes, they always come back to the main line or mainstream and do pro-life jokes as well in the same routine. So they do that bit anti-abortion as kind of a provocation, but they always end with, balance it with, ladies, at the end of the day, it's your body, your choice. Whereas this is what American Mind says. Nicholas de Santo is has gone only anti-abortion. So I have a routine which is just pro-life, you know. And to get back to your question, this sort of, I don't know how many is viral, but in the space of a few months, hundreds of thousands of people saw this, and today, like after about 6 months or so, almost 900,000 people. So that was nice and got me some recognition. Uh, but essentially, I also freelance as an interpreter and translator. So that's kind of my day job, if you like. So basically, I do that, and I do comedy, uh, YouTube, the occasional private gig, if you like, and headliners is a recent thing. So it's a bit of a
Okay.
gig economy, going from the, fixed salary to the gig economy, if you like.
Yeah, well, you can't pay your bills on recognition alone. That's the
Yeah,
problem. And
yeah.
I remember the Louis C.K. joke. He kind of compares abortion. He says, it's either like taking a bleep, meaning going to the toilet, or it's killing a baby." And it goes, and by the way, I think it is killing a baby. He admits it's killing a baby, but then he goes and says, "But we should do it anyway," which is kind of a dark kind of Louis C.K. take. But yeah, he does in a way pull it back. Yeah, they all pull it back, as you say, and you don't. It's nice to have a pro-life comedian. I mean, I've done pro-Christian jokes on stage. Not easy, and it's the most edgy stuff you can do these days. But
I know.
can you do normal clubs then? Because you sort of went a different route to me. It looks like you sort of went onto YouTube quite quickly, and you were sort of cancelled, and some comedy clubs have cancelled you, on they don't want you to play their venues, and I went a different route. I started before it got quite as crazy, and I did the sort of normal club route, comedy
Mm,
store, all this kind of thing. Not that it was necessarily the a smart path. I mean, you learn skills, but it's a very grueling way, and you struggle to make a living. But you've kind of, I mean, do you play the normal clubs? And if you do you find that you can do your material? Because I've found that if you're playing with a load of 20-year-olds, they don't even know what the paradigms are that you're subverting. Because if I
mm,
do comedy unleashed, I can do an anti-NHS joke, but they barely know enough at a normal club often to, especially the ones with
yeah.
younger audience like Top Secret in Covent Garden. If you said something about the NHS, they're like, what? You can do dating stuff, but if you talk about the NHS, it's like they might vaguely know they're supposed to like it, and so you can do a pro NHS joke. But to do an anti NHS joke is very hard because maybe because one, they don't like you to be anti NHS, but they probably just don't even know enough to even get the premise. Although you set up your premises very carefully, so that's one way of doing it. But have you found it's hard to play normal clubs?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to be honest, as you sort of hinted, I am in a weird place because there has been some recognition, and now I am on GB News and everything. But I was never a fully fledged professional, or maybe even a semi-professional comic when all this happened. So I wasn't very prolific to start with because I had a day job, and then with my kind of material, finding favorable clubs or gigs wasn't very easy to start with. Then my bosses said, "Okay, you are on written warning, so you have to stop this." So I kind of stopped it, except for the occasional gig. Then COVID happened, and when all this happened, I became more and more, political in my gigs. Not that I don't do or don't have the occasional, more mainstream or, and of course, by mainstream, I don't mean stupid things like, oh, uh, let's talk about my autism or airline food or, avocado dips, expensive. Uh, but I also have less controversial routines. But then, as I hope I have, uh, demonstrated, and you also kind of know, when you look at my history and what I went through, at some point I thought, what the heck? Let's be more political because we are in culture war, and I am going through all these, troubles. And if it's something that might get me out of work or might, get me canceled, let it be something worthwhile. Andrew Lawrence, who I'm sure has a funny joke. He says, not he doesn't mean it in relation to the cancel culture, but he says, you know, I it's good to be here. You get out of your house to let's hope I'm not butchering his joke. You get out of the house to do a gig, and the weather is horrible, traffic is horrible. If you're going by train, trains are horrible. A lot of clubs are horrible. Sometimes audience is horrible. And still some comics come out and say, "Oh, it's great to be here." Man, your house must be crap. You know? So
Yeah.
so to basically build on that joke by very funny Andrew Lawrence, if you need to go through all these horrible, troubles, especially when you have small kids like myself, let it be worth something, or let's make a difference. I hope I don't sound arrogant or anything, but does the world really need another comic who talks about buying fridges or dating or whatever? Because I can never be as good as like the underground joke that you do. Sitting in the disabled the
Oh yeah.
person opposite the other disabled seat. I say, okay, let's bring something to the table that nobody else is doing it. And the best compliment is that people saying, oh, I forgot that comedy could be about this. And if nobody's doing anti-abortion jokes or anti-abortion routines for that matter, the downside is I get canceled and fewer clubs would be willing to accept me for obvious reasons. But the upside is that people do remember me, and I maybe I make up for it on YouTube, because at the end of the day you want to be remembered and you want to feel like you have contributed, right?
Mm. Yeah, very interesting. I remember, I think it was Richard Pryor actually said a similar thing about, wanting to get into the point where you just want it to be actually what you want to talk about, and it has to be worthwhile, or why you even doing it. It's funny, by the way, that I'm your example of the sort of normie comedian doing mainstream material that you can't compete with. I would have thought it's someone like Michael
No.
McIntyre, but you got me down as a normie because I have that tube bit. But you are right. Don't worry, Nicholas. No, not many people can top my natural fluidity and elan in my delivery. Even if it's their first language, they can't get close. But so you're right to have your own niche. But it is funny how you point out it only makes you more extreme. Not that you're extreme, but I think that was your word. But you know what I mean. When they cancel people, where are you going to go? You're only going to double down on it. It's a very strange tactic in a way from them. And for me, it was partly the lockdown as well. It was that I wasn't in the comedy world because we were locked down. So I wrote for Spiked online and started just being more and more opinionated because I didn't have to deal with comics day to day and their
Mm.
nonsense. So that kind of helped. But do you still believe in comedy then? Because I don't believe in I hate the comedy world. I basically hate. It's not that I hate comedy now because I'll still be funny or something. But you can't hate comedy as a concept. But I hate the comedy industry so much that I don't want anything to do with it. I don't even like the fact that I have to work with comedians on headliners just because I want to have nothing to do with comedy anymore because I'm so sickened by it. But do you think there's hope for it then, or you just think hope for you personally outside it on putting stuff up on YouTube and doing comedy unleashed, basically?
Well, at this point, as you mentioned, I mean, whatever I can get, right? I don't want to rest on my laurels, presuming that there are laurels, but I've got a little bit of recognition, a little bit of encouraging signs, and who doesn't like compliments? It's the best thing when people, on YouTube from the other side of the globe, comment and say, well, come to our country, come to Australia, come to the US, come to Brazil, and thank you for saying this stuff. I showed this to my friend. It's the best thing. Uh, and so you have that sort of recognition when clubs, in your own city, have canceled you or won't give you stage time for because of the group thing and the pressure groups and all that. Um, I like comedy. English is not my first language. It's not even my second language. So I still I'm fascinated by how you make people laugh, and you make and I work as an interpreter, and I did linguistics. So you know how jokes translate and how jokes travel, and also that mechanical, if you like, aspect of it also fascinates me. And I do enjoy listening to comedy, even mainstream comedy, but good ones, Michael McIntyre or Brian Regan, who is my favorite American observational, clean comic. Norm Macdonald, who passed away, Canadian, but living in the U.S. He was Christian like us. I think more leaning on the conservative side like us. Not as much as me, but I think he was very funny and good. So I enjoy listening to comedy, and I enjoy doing comedy. But at the end of the day, you want to do something, and I just tell myself, if I go under the bus, the famous proverbial bus that can hit all of us anytime. This is the British thing. Um, I think Alistair Williams jokes about that. But if I'm hit by the bus tomorrow, I'll probably still be the only one who came with an entirely pro-life comedy, and who doesn't like an accolade or a title. And even if someone comes with that, which is funnier, I'll still be the first. So I think we are doing something worthwhile in the culture wars, and I can't not do that, because I don't know how else I can fight in the culture wars. And the culture wars is real. Unlike what the lefty comics tell you, that yeah, cancel culture doesn't exist really. Not according to my experience. So this is the way to contribute. So in a way, what is not to like? Because comedy allows me to explore my love of the language and my love of humor, have a good laugh, you know, which always helps. Find friends or like-minded friends, even better, like yourself, and to also be able to tell myself, at least I did something when the whole Western world were hell bent on collective suicide. So that's my take.
Great answer. I mean, and you're crushing it, giving it your third language. And yeah, shout out to Norm Macdonald, the greatest of all time. And also
Thank
shout out to Andrew Lawrence and Alistair Williams, who've both been on this podcast. This is where you end up when you're a cancelled comedian. It's this
you.
podcast. But
I'm in good company then.
yeah, absolutely, man. But you know what? Yeah, so it's interesting. You still have a fascination with the form of comedy and the language aspect. I mean, that is interesting. I mean, I did like writing jokes when you get a good one. It is a nice feeling. I'm less interested. I don't need it. So I like to be able to walk away and move on to other areas like podcasting, GB News, where you can also make an impact. So it's not that I've given up on the culture war, because there is no way out of the culture war. I sometimes get bored of it and think, oh, they're trying to cancel me again. They're trying to get me sacked again. Maybe I've had enough of this, but there is no way out of it. I had the thought the other day, I really wish I could get out of this culture war. And then I thought, yeah, of course you do, Nick. It's a war. Who likes a war? But we just have to fight it till we win it. That's how it ends. It doesn't
Yeah,
just end. I doubt they wanted the Second World War to carry on either. Not to compare, it was a crass comparison. This is a lot easier war. But yeah, I mean, although it could end the whole Western world. There is that. But the difference is with me, I take a weird pride in being like Robert De Niro in Heat. When he says like you just got to be able to walk away in 30 seconds from your whole life. Like I'm like, even if I've done 11 years of comedy and dedicated my life to it, I can just give it up if I need to for some other reason, and I take a sick pride in that. So whereas a lot of comedians, they desperately need comedy, they just need it for their ego or whatever it is. At my live podcast, I'll get to go and do what is kind of stand up. So I do it there, and obviously I do Free Speech Nation on GB News with a live audience, so I can do some of the skills. But and I did one gig with coming on just before Jordan Peterson for Comedy Unleashed, but I don't need it in that same way. But anyway, it's good that you still are doing it and still believe in it in some sense. Anyway, the podcast's not about me. What do you think though of the recent pro-Palestine stance in comedy? So we're used to the comedy world, and we know, and you've alluded to it with your BBC story, how insanely left-wing it is, and you've been cancelled from comedy clubs because of this. But now it's become particularly notable and particularly tasteless, and they're actually getting some pushback. So Josh Howie shared this thing from Kitty Lang, who was an agent with United Agents, and Lee Kern shared it as well. And actually, they got this to the point where she's now semi lost her job. Now, whether we agree with cancel culture, I don't agree with it. But in general, although it's almost to the point where do we just have to fight fire with fire? But she lost her job at United Agents. She didn't really lose her job. She just lost her place on the executive board. And what's the executive board of a comedy agent? Anyway, it sounds like nonsense. But there was some pushback. She was retweeting things about the beheading of babies didn't really happen. She was essentially retweeting Hamas propaganda without even thinking about it. Because what people don't realize is the comedy, or they might realize, the comedy world is so extremely left that you can easily say something radically pro-Palestine that borders on pro-Hamas, and that's like good for your career. But if you're Jeff Norcott and you say, "Well, you're a Tory," like, "Ooh, that's like the one Tory we can have." That's like liking Theresa May as edgy as you can get. And you've alluded to similar things earlier. But what's your take on that? Is that going to change anything? Is that going to make people think, "Hang on, this is kind of mad"? And is it odd? Is it unfortunate? Last caveat that that can only happen when we see anti-Semitism. That it can't happen because of hating white people or general wokeness. I think it can only happen when it's actually anti-Semitism. Any thoughts on any of that?
Well, we see a lot of unpleasant things. Sometimes, as you said, it's insane, but it's hardly surprising, isn't it? Now, Hamas is the current thing, and the troubles and the hardships of the Palestinians is the current thing. So if you go against the groupthink or the echo chamber diktat, you risk a lot. Now, um, Israelis or Jews still have some defenses against this madness because of the Holocaust and because institutionally our leaders and our institutions still have some, degree of sanity, or because of the past, because of the Holocaust, there's some legislation to protect them, and they have some minority status, so they can somehow try to apply those instruments, but not that it's completely working, because we see both in the UK, in the US, and elsewhere in Europe, we have beefed up security, we have attacks on Jews, synagogues, murders, Israeli flags burned on university campuses, which would have been fine under free speech, except that again we have double standards. So you cannot, you know, uh, dare to dream of, burning a BLM flag or a Palestinian flag or anything like that on any campus or anywhere for that matter. So what's a lot of people, I mean, not that I was famous, but a lot of even famous or big public figures have been saying in these years is that you bring in millions of people who hate us. At best, they are incompatible and they have nothing in common with us. And at worst, they actually hate us and are, determined to change our way of life and to conquer us, to subjugate us, to turn us into the caliphate. And a lot of them are, saying that openly. And then what do you expect? I don't know, to use a BBC or journalistic cliche at the end of the, the TV reports, time will tell. It remains to be seen. But I hope that these massive, vicious pro Hamas, pro terrorism, pro violence rallies that we've seen on our streets and on campuses, maybe it opens up the eyes of some of the lefties who were just, had a maybe more romantic vision of immigration, open borders, the Palestinian cause, and all that. I heard that some Jewish donors of a lot of major American universities have started holding back their money because they are saying, okay, if this is the product of these universities, why I should be funding this? So so I hope that the positive out of this is that it works as an eye opener. That we were supposed to be, um, you know, uh, maybe I said this on headliners, maybe I didn't, but it's incredible that you get crucified as, and I always think of our other friend Leo Kurz, who got into trouble because he's not a fan of women's football, right? You get I mean, metaphorically, obviously, but crucified for saying women's football is boring, or you or gender pay gap doesn't exist. Another joke of mine. I know that because I do say that a lot. At the same time, these so-called feminists and lefties are chanting for Hamas after they've done those things to those women and children, and they have filmed them on their own GoPro. So this is no Israeli, spin operation or or propaganda. We are we are basing our judgment on what we witness on their own outlet. And these lefties, I mean, the cognitive dissonance, if you like, is so glaring that some liberals, so-called liberals, or old style liberals or lefties with some sanity left in their brains, should see the contrast and the hypocrisy of that. So if I wanted to be a bit optimistic, I'd hope that would be the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not about women. It's never about anything they say it's about. It only comes down to ideology. It comes down to usually a kind of utopian ideology. Although, as some people have pointed out, and I think Toby was saying this to me, in the case of wokeness, not even really a utopian ideology. It seems to be just an entirely destructive, nihilistic ideology. But that seems to take precedence over everything. And like you say, do you really care about women when you're prepared to see women be raped and murdered and go, well, it's justified because they're occupied or whatever. It's madness. There's no consistency. There's no morality. It just seems to be this one kind of voracious ideology that has no end point. So yeah, well, I've been wondering, like you. I mean, I started to think when people like Rivka Brown said, "Oh yeah, this is a day of celebration." She's a Navarra media person. We saw people being raped and murdered, and we saw the true face of decolonization, which itself is kind of the true face of wokeness. I mean, what is wokeness? It's critical race theory, it's decolonization, and a few other things. And we saw the face of him. I thought, okay, these people have made a mistake here, and actually, it will make some impact. But then we also saw the pushback, and it kind of going back towards the pro-Palestine side, especially as Israel starts to, do military operations. We're going to see this more and more. BBC won't say Hamas are terrorists. Channel 4 pro-Palestine. Sky News to some slightly lesser extent. Keir Starmer on the fence, trying not to alienate his Muslim base. It's kind of ridiculous. But academic agent put it interestingly. He's a YouTuber you may have followed, and he said he's always been saying that they're going to put the woke away at some point. And my understanding is just like the elites are going to realize woke's not popular. We're going to kind of tone this down a bit. But then he said, hang on, or is woke going to put Israel away in this case? So it's a kind of battle, a PR battle between Israel or the pro-Israel side or just the anti-Hamas side and the sort of woke side of who's going to win this culture war battle aside from the actual military battle. That's my take on it anyway. And
But if I
yeah,
may add something briefly, it part of it is because of the nutheads and the lefties who do hate the West, who do hate white people, who do want open borders so that all of us become beige and the whites disappear from, and most of them are white actually, disappear from the face of the planet. But part of it is that our establishment, our leaders, our security apparatus are worried that this might have domestic consequences because we have millions of them in here. And of course, they are right to be worried, but then the question is whose fault is that? So when you change the goalpost and try to import future voters because you are the Labor Party or you are the Democratic Party in the US, okay? On the one hand, you don't want to alienate these potential Muslim voters, okay? But even worse, you fear civil war, you fear backlash, you fear unrest, and this is the situation we are in. So we have this is a twofold problem. We have the crazies, the Novara media and company, the likes of them, and the campus professors and the gender studies, professors and whatever. And then we have, our leaders and our governments who have a duty to, of course, to safeguard our the population. So and for that you cannot fault them. But the problem is that this is what open borders create. We have the so-called fifth column, and they have not become like us unless we, contrary to what we were promised. Because turns out people are different. We are not all the same. And just by bringing in millions of people and saying them and telling them, yeah, don't kill us, and we give you a passport, they don't become just like us. It has multiculturalism hasn't worked. Sorry, it wasn't as brief as I wanted it to be, but this is
No,
I think this is important.
it was more brief than I was. It was no, it's a great point. I've said this as well. We've got the idea battle, which is coming from the universities who have all pushed decolonization, and now we're seeing just how ugly that really is. And then we have the on the streets battle, which is people shouting, "We want a jihad. We want a," which is the solution for the armies. We want the armies of the Muslim countries should rise up, and the Met Police saying, "Well, jihad has many meanings, guys, and it can mean in a struggle for peace." We have a ITV presenter who's an OBE saying the same thing, and you're right. And the cynical reason is the ruling elites have done this, and now the police can't control it. If they say something that seems too anti-jihad, they could have too many people could rebel at once on the streets, and they can't control it. So yeah, it becomes simply a logistics problem. So then they have to use this very inflammatory language, inflammatory for normal people who are going, "What are you talking about? This is obviously." It's at very least hate speech if we're going to have hate speech laws, but it's also incitement. It's also dangerous. But then the police have to pretend it isn't, yeah, so exactly those
I
points.
had this joke in my one of my recent routines at Comedy Unleashed about Asia Bibi. If you remember,
Yeah,
Asia Bibi, she was a Pakistani Christian woman, sentenced to death. Her life was in danger, and the UK refused to give her asylum. And
yeah.
my kind of joke, I don't know how funny people find it, but at least it's true, was that UK didn't take her in. A Christian country headed a government headed by Theresa May, Christian woman, Christian name, three flags, three crosses on our flag, and we created Pakistan as the United Kingdom. We didn't take her, and who took her? Justin Trudeau took her. So we lost the the defense of Christianity, and that routine of mine is about defense of Christianity, and anyway, we lost defense of Christianity to Justin Trudeau, and I'd say losing defense of Christianity to Justin Trudeau is like losing the Native American heritage race to Elizabeth Warren. But but there was a thanks for laughing at that.
people
But
have
there was
people have to know quite a lot. That's a classic example of a joke. You have to know quite a lot for that joke to work.
Yeah,
You have to know about
that's for
Elizabeth
my
Warren. You have to
American
know about
market
God.
actually. That's for the American market
Right.
who are big on YouTube, but are on my YouTube channel for us. So you need to know, yeah, Elizabeth Warren. Yeah, that's not a joke you can do at, as you were saying before, at hen do's or stag do's or mainstream clubs or even universities. But
Who's drinking
um,
tonight? So let me talk about Asia Bibi and Elizabeth Warren. Whoosh.
yeah.
That's hilarious.
But
Doing that in
what
Jongleurs, Portsmouth.
I'm saying that because of the security component. So again, the argument was, there might be rebellions on first our embassy in Pakistan might be attacked, but uh, God knows why Canadians were not worried about their embassy being attacked. But also we have a sizable angry Muslim population on our streets and in our communities. So this is the reality we are dealing with. It's not just the crazy communists and the intersectional coalition who have a sympathy for brown decolonizers of Hamas. It's the security element as well.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, I should have said that first, but it's a dual pronged attack at least. And yeah, and you say we're a Christian country. Of course, we're not anymore. I grew up in a Christian country called England. I sometimes say, but now we see Isabel Vaughan Spruce arrested again the other day, or spoken to by the police for praying in her head in the wrong spot. At the same time that the Met Police is downplaying someone shouting about jihad and the armies of Muslim countries must rise up, and it's like that's not a Christian country, is it? A Christian arrested for praying in her head while you can shout that. It's not a Christian country anymore. So, and of course, the Equalities Act, as Peter Hitchens argued, meant that it's not a Christian country because once you place Christianity on the same level as Scientology or any number of other things, then it's no longer a Christian country. So, although a head of state is still nominally the head of the Church of England, which so that's confusing. Um, Maybe I'll ask you about Christianity, but I didn't want to miss the chance to ask you about Iran because you are someone who, and I'm only mentioning this nearly an hour into the podcast, you were in an Iranian prison for 2 weeks, which is mental. And your uncle, I believe, was a political prisoner for 4 or 5 years. And so I wondered if, coming from Iran, you had a particular insight on that, because we've just seen the US at the time of recording carry out airstrikes on, well, strikes, I'm not sure what nature of strike, probably an airstrike on Iranian facilities in Syria. So is this basically World War Three? Are Iran going to step in, or what's going to happen?
Well, I can't. And I've said this before. I can't dwell much on my short prison experience because in Iran it's really nothing. And as I said, my own uncle did like 4 or 5 years, and a lot of it, when you have been there or you come from there, this is a pretty much a common experience. So, uh,
2 weeks in jail is you're a pussy, basically.
yeah, exactly. So I will make a lot of people angry by trying to take any sort of street cred or jail cred for that. But yeah, of course, that is a big part of my background, which makes my disappointment with the way West is going all the more, poignant or pronounced, because when you come, and there's a lot of comedy that can be developed there, but I'll spare you for now. Uh, when you come from there as I wouldn't say refugee because I was born in Europe, but I lived in Iran, so I came here legally. A lot of people come here illegally or as genuine refugees, never mind fake refugees. But for those who flee the Asia Bibis of Iran or other Muslim countries who come here or Canada, wherever, only to be disappointed to see that they cannot criticize Islam for fear of being, canceled or called a bigot or, uh, Uncle Tom of the Muslim world, if you like. That's all the more disappointing. Now, having said that, I think Iranian regime is wiser, knows better than to intervene in a manner that even a spineless, shambolic abomination of a U.S. administration, that is the Biden government, will have to do something about it because, as you said, it could be a major regional war, if not World War III. So I think they are wiser than that. But there is a part of me that hopes they would do something because then that would trigger their downfall. Because I believe that regimes or tyrannies of this degree of ruthlessness does not just, you know, go by themselves. They might crumble, but obviously an external factor uh, is always useful. So of course they are very sad to see their proxies on whom they have spent billions of dollars throughout the years. That is Hamas, Islamic Jihad, uh, Lebanon's Hezbollah. I mean, Israel is not going to eliminate Lebanon's Hezbollah this time round because they are much bigger and it's a different front. It's in the north. But Iran is sad to see their proxies potentially being on the verge of annihilation, and they want to do something about it. But then Israel has, no, for Israel, it's an existential matter, and they cannot sit and let this recent Hamas attack go unpunished. They have said so. They want to eliminate Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza Strip. So long story short, if Iran intervenes and opens a northern front with the help of their other proxy, Lebanese Hezbollah, then Israel will have to react. And if Iran really does target the US, even a spineless government such as Biden, especially near an election, has to do something, which will not be good for Iran.
Okay, very interesting answer. We don't get many Iranians on, so this is interesting. Yeah, interesting take that it could risk a major conflict, but at the same time it could take out the Iranian regime. I suppose it's a bit risky. But what about, since you did mention Christianity a few times there? So are you a Catholic? I'm just guessing because you're Italian.
Technically I'm not a Catholic because once you have a Muslim father, you automatically inherit that religion. There's no baptism in Islam. And of course, if you say anything different, they will kill you. But as I said, I was born in Italy, and I feel very much Italian, and I've always had a lot of sympathy for Christianity, Christian values, and Catholicism. Now, my wife is a Catholic and not practicing, but my children have been both baptized, christened, and the one who goes to school does go to a Catholic school. So I have a lot of sympathy for that, although technically I haven't been baptized myself.
So okay, you're not technically Catholic because you're tainted by birth, but you're sort of a practicing. Your family's Catholic. Okay, um, interesting. At least you're not an atheist. That's the key. That's the key part because they're banned from the podcast. But what do you think about, while we're on this, what do you think about the family? I was thinking about you. I was thinking, I wonder if Nicholas would have children if you were English. I just had this weird thought that, like, because I know a lot of comedians and they're kind of weird, and you're doing comedy at a fairly late age. I was thinking, would a Nicholas type person have children? I was realizing it's maybe because, and you said something about this, that immigrants tend to have more children still, and we know this. The birth rates are all down in Western countries, although they are down in Japan and Korea and so on as well. But I don't know. I just suddenly thought, do you think there's something in that? And do you think we're in real trouble with our birth rates and with our sort of weird attack on the family in the West and in Britain?
Yeah, of course we are in trouble, and I'd like to think that even in that department, I'm kind of doing my part. I mean, obviously, you don't have children just to win the demographic war, although that war is also real. So I have been and I am in a rather precarious situation. We were discussing the sources of income and the gig economy, lockdown. I left a relatively uh, actually a very much safe job, which might be, the dream of a lot of people in my shoes, um, presumably prestigious as well, because believe it or not, there are still millions of people in this country and around the world that think the BBC is, the envy of the world. I don't know how, but uh, I was there 13, 12 years of my life, 40 hours, 50 hours a week. So didn't didn't come to that conclusion. But Uh, still, I have two kids because I like, at some point I think uh, that's what we need to do, and I like having kids and I love them, and I also think that yes, there is more to life than just being a consumer and ordering food and buying a new mobile every 6 months and all that, and we have a responsibility. So if we have a responsibility to the future generations to leave them with a good environment and fossil fuels or alternative energy or clean air and all that, how come we don't have a responsibility to create that next generation, in the first place? Um, so yeah, and of course, it all gives you again more perspective. So obviously having two children, if I'm canceled from a gig or if I don't get stage time with a certain club, it hurts a bit less because I have other priorities as well. And again, if I want to, go all the way to this other area of London through traffic, this is time taking out of my family life and my playing with my kids time. So I might as well do a set about something serious, hopefully funny, but you know I'm not gonna do airline food or Tinder because there's somebody else who's doing it and probably is funnier than me. So makes I also have to kind of run the number of my gigs by my wife because somebody has to be looking at, like, tonight she's out with them. So it's all that. So it gives you all the more reason to be picky in terms of your material, because at the end of the day you're not getting this time back. So it might as well be something that people say, oh, okay, glad I didn't think about it that way, or thank you for They come to you after the gig or in the interval and saying, okay, maybe I didn't laugh too much because of my girlfriend next to me, or because of the colleagues or whatever. But I'm glad you said those things, and I think like you. So I think those are the best feedback to receive.
Yeah, it's true, and I do get that for this podcast as well, and the GB stuff. So and my other podcast, so that is nice. People say you're speaking out because we can't. I'm just one of these people that can't help but speak out apparently, and although it's never enough for some people, the ones that constantly want me to walk out of GB News every 5 minutes because of some presenter left that they like or got sacked, which is
I
annoying. But
know.
but do you have a take on the birth rate thing? Because I was at a debate the other night with David Aronovich and Matt Goodwin, and Ivanovic made this very sort of disdainful comment towards the end. He said, "Oh, and this man, meaning Goodwin, wants you to have more babies." And he said it as like it was like a big joke. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, you phrased it in a sort of comedic way, but we do need more babies. So what's going to happen? And people have pointed out, experts on this, that immigration is only a short term fix for it. But have you actually heard any successful policy for how to improve birth rate? Given that immigration is only short term and given that so many countries need to do it, have you actually heard any policy that's going to work?
Well, I mean, we all know what policies are gonna work. The question is who is applying them. I haven't been keeping very close tabs on this, but in Italy now we have a female prime minister, by the way, who obviously wasn't too much to the liking of the feminists, a very conservative, identitarian prime minister in Georgia Meloni, and they were going in that direction. I don't know how many of those policies have been applied, and obviously she's had a lot of things on her hands, especially the question of immigration from Africa and the borders and all that. I'm sure you're aware of that. But the government, any government, must make it easier for people to have families, to have children, rather than making it actually more difficult. If you compare, and this is not rocket science. If you look other countries, Scandinavian countries, or even places like Germany, Austria, even in terms of maternity leave, in terms of kindergarten or nursery vouchers or subsidies, um, tax cuts for people who get married. Sometimes it's the other way around. Actually, sometimes you're kind of punished, for having children, which is crazy. And I don't think even immigration is a fix, as we just discussed, because immigration, they tell us, okay, we are bringing in, it becomes a chicken and egg situation. We are bringing in the immigrants because native mothers don't have kids or as many kids. But first of all, whose fault is that? Because you've been bombarding them with feminism and with all these lies, and you pay their IVF at the taxpayer's expense. So they think, okay, when I get 40, I'll give it a go on the NHS, right? And there are campaigns for them to make it even easier, to give it also to same sex couples, but that's another story. But what you should tell people is that at some age you need to have kids, because it's a natural thing to do, and because we need the kids also for economic reasons, to pay into the pension and everything. And guess what? Millions of people we import from outside, presuming that they come to work and they do work and they contribute, and that's debatable. They might end up, demonstrating for Hamas on our streets.
As an outsider, then to Britain, I don't mean that as a pejorative outsider, but someone obviously coming from another country, what is your perception of Britain? Because I often ask, or England, whichever you prefer, I often ask the guest, is Britain finished? Which is my kind of pessimistic question. And I've had some quite optimistic answers and some very pessimistic. What do you think about that?
But I want to have, I mean, as long as it's free, uh, I mean, as long as it's free of charge, let's be optimistic, right? Obviously, and throughout this discussion, there's a lot to make us, despair. But if Britain is finished, and I always see it a bit more, uh, globally, because of my Italian background, and because my wife is Austrian, and because I love America as well and follow American politics as well. If we are finished, then there would be no point in doing what I'm doing or what you are doing, right? It is true that we want not to go down without a fight, but we also don't want to, go down necessarily. Ideally, we want to win this. So you and I appreciate that recently in Poland they have, elected the European Union's favorite guy, and the conservatives have lost that election. But there are a lot of positive signs. We with Brexit, with despite all the confusion with Trump, with the Italian government, with the Swedish elections recently, very good gains for AFD, Alternative for Deutschland in regional state elections in Germany. So that's that part of it. And then with efforts that people like, I mean, I'm myself in a much smaller version, but the success of your podcast and similar outlets and podcasts and alternative media, both in the UK and in the US, more mainstream like GB News. I don't know if you can call GB News mainstream, but also non-traditional means such as podcasts, uh, YouTube, or elsewhere, other platforms, especially other platforms. This means that we are creating content and we are creating alternative channels for people to get together, to organize themselves, to express themselves. And in a way, it might be argued it is sad because the society is becoming more polarized. But again, whose fault is that? You know, they try to banish us from everywhere. Okay, you cancel us from gigs or from Edinburgh. We go and make money and search for fame on YouTube or wherever. So I think there is reason for hope, and God bless Eastern European countries, despite this recent election results in Poland, uh, that are telling the globalist overlords, yeah, if diversity and multiculturalism is what we see in Birmingham and Manchester or Luton or Leicester, no, thank you. We will keep our traditions and we will keep our population the way it is. So let's see what again the BBC cliche, time will tell. But if both of them are free of charge, I'll take optimism.
Well, that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, I wonder if what I do makes any difference, but it's just you just sort of do what you have to do or what you feel you must do anyway. Though I have sometimes thought if I had the requisite skills, would I just get out of the culture war and do business or something? Because sometimes I watch videos about that, people saying like, why are you just howling into the void? You should just go and make money because we have the best technology we've ever had and so on. But I don't think I could do that. This is who I am. I'm sort of stuck doing this, even if it's futile. Um, but what do you, is it, well, so
Yeah,
maybe you've already,
you got to be true to yourself.
yeah,
Never mind that even in the business world, the culture world catches up with you, right?
true.
But even discounting that, you are the artistic type. You have a conscience. You have a soul that is sensible or sensitive to what happens around it. So it's not that easy to switch all that off and go and manufacture something. With all due respect, we need that too. But yeah, this is you got to be true to yourself again,
Yeah.
even as a Christian concept.
Yeah. That seems to be how it is. And so you may have already answered it, but how do we then win the culture war?
um well, yeah, I might, yeah, as I said, maybe I can build on that. We need to come up, we need to fight back. We need to be uh and again, this is a cliche, but children are the future. But first of all, we need to make children, and secondly, we need to protect the children from this indoctrination. And there are some good signs that I don't know what letter now is it Gen Z or Gen X or whatever, but the post millennials are a bit wiser than the millennials themselves. Um, we see what the education is doing to these kids. We see what universities are doing. They get into debt and learn nothing, and even worse, they learn terrible stuff. So we need to create alternative channels, uh, even if it means, people like Daily Wire in the US, not just they create content, but they also came up with their own razor brand and now chocolate brand. We may have to come up with our own gyms or restaurants because that's what happened. Because there was this movement of, you know, go to the restaurant and harass the Republican who dines there. This by a U.S. Congresswoman, no less. This was
Maxine
encouraged.
Waters, I remember it.
I think so. Yeah. Or let's boycott this gym chain because one of the people on the board is a Republican donor. Never mind that if you boycott that, gym workers like ordinary people will lose their jobs. But so and we see this, social media alternative platforms are taking off, and somehow it was slowed down because Elon Musk took over Twitter. Thank God for that. But at the end of the day, we need to be a bit bolder and braver, and of course it has a price, but it's a war. So I think eventually the trick is to just pay the price. Maybe we need a bit more. We need to be a bit more organized, a bit more convinced, and of course, uh, conservative values or mindset sometimes doesn't lend itself to a lot of organization necessarily, or a lot of compact action, because, well, part of it, I say it as a joke, but there's truth to that, because a lot of people who vote conservative or who are conservative actually have real jobs. No disrespect to ourselves, but they produce stuff, they manufacture stuff, they are farmers. You need to do stuff. You can't just be campaigning and marching all the time. Although the Dutch farmers set the example, or the Canadian truck drivers as well. But we have families, and we have actual jobs. And also, again, being conservative, maybe we believe that, yeah, the market sorts itself out, offer and demand. No, it's not like that. A few years ago, we believed, yeah, these uni graduates, lefties, woke lefty graduates, go to the corporate world and they see what the real world is. No, no, no. They are changing their corporate world in their own image and likeness. So that didn't work out, did it? So we need to be a bit more proactive and more aggressive, and also more united. Just the way, I mean, if and again, if I'm allowed to have a joke, I say Jesus Christ said, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they are doing." And from that, we learned to forgive feminists who like Islam. And today, if I want to update that, we learn to forgive queers for Palestine or queers for Hamas. Now, if these people can find common grounds, admittedly because of their ardent hatred of the West, okay, but for whatever nefarious reason, if these people can get united, why can't we? Why can't we, Christian, even atheists, but atheists who do have some sense, might rather live in a Christian country than in an Islamic caliphate, right? So we need to be better at networking, and put aside petty rivalry. High level, be it U.S. Congress or the Tory party, the grassroots level, fellow comedians, we need to, or content creators, we need to just cooperate, and strength is in unity.
Absolutely great answer. We need to follow the example of Queers for Palestine. If they can come together in that brief moment before they get thrown off the roof, then surely we can come together.
Exactly.
Ending on a joke as well, which is the comedian in you, which is great, and a strange and a great positive of You basically said, "I believe the children are our future." I thought you were going to break out into song at that point, but and by the way, it is a real job when you've gone and done 6 TV shows in a week and produced 2 podcasts where you have to come up with all the topics yourself and research the guests. I've realized now that is a real job because I'm working so much. I'm basically a farmer of content. But but there was one other thing I wanted to come back on. There were so many things there. Oh well, I can't remember. We definitely need to build things though. You're absolutely right. And I think there is more and more focus on that now. People are realizing that, as you say, Daily Wire, others, me and Toby doing our little thing. There's a lot of people realizing we've got to build our own stuff. And like you say, yeah, it's going to come down to our own everything, probably a whole parallel economy, weirdly, of the kind Malcolm X kind of talked about, where we're there with our own shops and gyms, like you're saying. It's weird, but maybe that's how it has to be if they're going to keep canceling us. Yeah, great point.
Because we need to make it costly again. Why do you think? Because you watch again, and there's so much comedy in that, and I sometimes have jokes about that as well. But when you look at all this woke advertising, where always the stupid guy is white, where always the thief is a white guy, and every family is interracial. Do you think all this nonsense, the companies or the corporations don't know is just ridiculous or is over the top or is somehow insulting? I think they do know, but at the end of the day, the typical conservative consumer is less, vicious or less likely to boycott. And as I said, has a family, has to look at the price tag maybe more than the, uh, woke commercial, which is insulting or unrealistic. And again, they believe in the free market and free economy and offer and demand, sort itself out. The invisible hand of the free market, whatever that is. But then at some point we need to say, enough is enough, and hence and thankfully, another recent trend, we saw what happened with Target after they came up with these swimming costumes, which were, gender fluid, and they had pockets for little boys to hide their penises and all that nonsense. And they had a huge backlash. So if if people if leftists can do that, we should do that as well. We should tell, the manufacturer, the producer, the supermarket chain, whoever it is, if you insult me or treat me as an idiot, and you cannot expect at the same time to have my money, I'll take my business elsewhere, not just watching content, but also shopping for groceries or going to restaurants or gyms, whatever that is.
Absolutely. And we are seeing the signs of this now. Coca Cola removed any reference of BLM from their website. Victoria's Secret said we're going back to having actually attractive women again. That was interesting. Unilever said we're going to stop virtue signaling. So there are signs. And on the artistic side, I keep saying the hero's journey is inherently far closer to conservatism than it is to leftism, and because it's close to reality. It's an essential reality that it represents. So all these great movies about a man's struggle, any sort of Clint Eastwood movie, Star Wars, John Wick, almost anything you can name is far more conservative than it is. And when you try and do a leftist movie, it doesn't work. And South Park has just put out a couple of brilliant parodies of this as we record. There was one about this woman who keeps going to the Panda Stone and pandering to her audience, and the more she goes to it, the weaker the movies get, and then eventually it gets crazy and it releases like demons from another dimension. And yeah, the South Park have actually just destroyed this stuff. So yeah,
Yeah, I need to
yeah.
watch
There's
that for
2 great
sure.
clips. One's with Cartman saying that everyone's in his school has turned diverse, and like suddenly Kenny's like a lesbian or something. That's hilarious. And there's another one as well.
Mhm.
So you got to watch those. But yeah, all right, awesome answer. So many interesting things in that episode. Thanks so much for doing it. Where can people find you, Nicholas?
Well, thanks very much for having me. My YouTube channel is called Anglo Italian Comedy. And I'm also on Rumble with the same name, far fewer subscribers or followers, Anglo Italian Comedy. And on Twitter, I am at Nico De Santo, Nico underscore De Santo. And I think on Instagram, I'm at Nicholas underscore De Santo. So if people want to follow me, they can follow me on any of those platforms.
All right, awesome. Thanks, mate. See you in a bit.
Thank you. Good to talk to you.